Now it's time to export our audio mixdown, and I'm going to show you my multi-mixdown method, because what you do during the export is going to have a lot to do with what happens to this file after you've mixed it down. For example, are you going to send it to somebody to get mastered, or are you going to master it in a different program, or are you going to master different mixdowns together in Cubase, or is it going to go directly to audio CD or MP3? Well, it's because of all of those questions that I always perform 3 or 4 different audio exports, and I'm going to perform 4 on this particular project. Let's assume that we're going to send this file off to a mastering house to get mastered. So those mastering engineers don't like to have any plugins on them at all. So I'm going to disable the Magneto plugin just by bypassing that plugin. And then I'm also going to bypass the brick wall limiter because I'm going to send this mastering house a 32-bit audio format. And in 32-bit, the actual output of Cubase cannot clip. So whenever that audio file gets brought into another program that can read 32-bit audio files, that clipping information is actually not clipped. It's above 0, but it's not clipping. So as long as you're exporting a 32-bit file, you won't necessarily have to worry too much about brick wall limiting the output. And you definitely don't need to have any dithering going on because this is a high bitrate version of the export. So now let's go to the File pull-down menu, select Export and Audio Mixdown. And so over here on the left, I want to make sure that I'm exporting the stereo output channel. Then you'll want to give the file a name. In this case, it's going to be impasse, and it's going to be version or mix version 19 because that's what I ended up with. And then this is going to have a little extension at the end of the file name called HBR, and then I'm going to put a 0 at the end. And that 0 is going to tell me that this file didn't have any mastering plugins on at all. So this is a high bitrate version with no mastering plugins. Then I'm going to come to the path or where this file is going to be saved, and I'm going to click this little drop-down box, and I'm going to choose my own folder. Then I'm going to make a new folder called Mix, and I'm going to hit Create. Now all of these mixes that I'm going to create in the audio export are going to go into this folder for mixes. So now I'm going to hit Save. Then there's a few more things I need to do. I'm going to export this as a WAV file format, which is a linear, uncompressed file format. The original sample frequency of this project was 44.1 kilohertz and 32-bit float, so I'm going to leave this set at 32-bit float because this is going to get sent to a mastering house. They'll want it in as many bits as they can get. Then I'm not going to export it to the pool and the audio track, and I'm going to make sure that all of these other checkboxes are turned off, except you might want to leave the deactivate external MIDI inputs checked, and you may want to check this close window after export. That way when the export is done, this window will vanish. Then I'm going to hit the export button, and it's going to take a little bit of time to export this project depending upon how many tracks you have and how many virtual instruments you're using, and also how fast your computer is. Then when it's done, I can think about our second mixdown, which is going to be a high bitrate file, but with the mastering plugins. So I'm going to enable Magneto and the brick wall limiter and repeat the export process, except this time I'm going to change the name. So this is going to be impasse mix R19, high bitrate, and with a 1 at the end to indicate to me, this is just my own little method, that tells me that the mastering plugins were on during this mix, and then I'm going to click the export button because all of the other settings are identical to the last mixdown. And that's going to take a moment to get completed. And once it's done, let's talk about our third mixdown, which is going to be a mastered 16-bit version of the project because this type of file can be saved directly to an audio CD. So if you burned this file to an audio CD and took it out to your car stereo, you could listen to it straight away as long as you save it in a 16-bit format. And whenever you're bringing the bit depth down, you're going to want to enable that dithering plugin. So I'm going to turn that plugin on. I'm going to double-click on that plugin to reveal the control panel and make sure that our output bits are set to 16. Now I'm going to go back into the export window, and this time I'm going to need to make a couple of changes. First, I'm going to need to change the name. So this one is actually going to be CD1. So CD indicates that this is a 44.1 kilohertz 16-bit file, which is audio CD compatible, and the one just tells me that this is a mastered file, so it has some mastering plugins on it. Then I'm going to make one other change down here in the audio engine output settings, and that is I'm going to change the bit depth to 16-bit. And then I'm going to click the export button, so now it's going to be exporting that audio CD compatible audio file. And then there's one last export that we're going to perform, and that is to an MP3 format. Now, even though MP3s are a variable bit rate, I am going to recommend that you leave the dithering plugin on because that will get the file down to a 16-bit format before the MP3 encoding process takes over. So whenever you're exporting MP3s, always make sure you use a dithering plugin. Now I'm going to go back to the File menu, select Export and Audio Mixdown, and now I'm just going to change the name of this file to R19, and I'm going to come to the file format, and I'm going to change it from a WAV file to an MP3 file, which is known as an MPEG-1 Layer 3 file, and I'm going to set the bit rate at either 256 or all the way up to 320. Because basically the higher the bit rate, the better this is going to sound. So that's why I typically set it to up to 320. Then I'm going to make sure that high quality mode is enabled, and I am going to insert the ID3 tag, and the ID3 tags are what shows up in an MP3 player. So if you edit the ID3 tags, you can come right here and enter the title, artist, track number, and year information, and I've already done that, so I don't need to enter it again. That way that information will show up on the MP3 player or in iTunes or a Windows-based audio player. Then I can come to the export button, and this is going to export an MP3 compatible version of the Cubase project. And then when it's done, I'm going to bounce out to my Finder, or if you're on a Windows PC, you'd be bouncing out to your Windows Explorer. But I'm going to go to my Finder, and I'm going to look at that project folder, and I'm going to scroll to the Mix folder that I made. I'm going to get past all of these Cubase projects. Finally, I find the Mix folder, and inside of it, I have those 4 different exports of the exact same Cubase project. I have a high bitrate version without any mastering effects. I have a high bitrate version with the mastering effects. Then I also have a 16-bit CD audio compatible format with the mastering plugins. And finally, I have an MP3 compatible version. So that multi-mixdown method gives you all the different audio formats that you may need to send the file somewhere or put it on an MP3 player or an audio CD player. And if you do them all at once, you ensure that the sound of all of those files is identical because your Cubase project was edited at the exact same state when you performed the export.